What would be like before? Close my eyes and then...
And then open them again.
Just like having your picture taken.
This is insane!
But with the most expensive camera in the world.
You know, Indians thought photos would steal their souls.
In this case, they'd be right.
There must be something wrong. Can't you run a diagnosis or something?
Why was it still talking?
It's the same like before.
Catherine, why was he still talking?
That's how it works, you know that.
What do you mean?
You know it's not magic. You were copied. The sleeping Simon in the seat was copied, and now you are here, just like Simon lived on in Toronto.
Ever since the release of SOMA, players have been debating about the so-called Cointoss analogy brought up by Simon and Catherine throughout the story of the game. The Cointoss is first brought up when the protagonist Simon Jarrett is tasked to acquire a different body that is able to traverse the perils of the Atlantic's abyss without the risk of imploding. For this purpose, he needs to make use of various pilot seats found at Paphos 2 to make a perfect copy of his consciousness that can then be placed in the new body. Bear in mind, however, that this is not the first time Simon Jarrett has undergone this procedure, as the original Simon has long died by the time the story takes place, and the current Simon being little more than a very complex copy of his original brain, which transfers his personality, the core of his being, essentially what makes Simon Simon, onto a machine. From the perspective of this current Simon, he has seemingly won the coin toss, as he is the one who is currently alive, while the original Simon has long died. Furthermore, lacking the knowledge about said death, the current Simon would likely still be under the impression that he is the one true Simon. At the core of this coin toss analogy lies the idea that in a very moment when the digitalized consciousness of a person is being copied onto a new device, such as a new body for our boy Simon, the Simon who is currently experiencing the copying is met with a game of chance, coming with a 50% success rate. Success, in this case, means that Simon who is being copied will continue his existence inside the new host body, that his life will continue unaltered and unaffected, regardless of what occurs to the original body which he has been copied from. The very body, the Simon, who, from his perspective at least, has lost the coin toss. The first time Simon speaks of this is on the elevator that leads into the abyss, where Simon says that he has basically flipped a coin, and if I had called the wrong side, I'd be rotting away at Omicron. But is this assumption correct? Ever since uploading my video on Simon Jarrett, I have noticed that quite a few people have been debating over this idea of the coin toss and whether this analogy holds any weight. Furthermore, while going over SOMA's story again and over all the different conversations and statements from individual characters for the sake of this video, I have discovered that Simon and Catherine are not the only ones who are making use of this line of thinking, which brings us to our first chapter.
Did you know that the human body consists of up to 75 trillion individual cells? They typically don't stay with us till we die. Some live a few days, while others live a few years. We're not affected by their short lifespans, as they're replaced by new cells which help sustain our bodies. I don't think anyone would argue that we ever lose our persona due to this process. Yet we are clearly in a constant state of transformation. Then how do we remain the same? A continuous flow of thought and perception keeps an unbroken chain of continuity that we know as our self.
Mark Sarang was a high-ranking Carthage Industries official and one of the 3 secret agents tasked with observing the newly installed Warden unit at Paphos 2. Sarang is long dead by the time we as Simon come along, but he has left traces of his presence all over Theta's station. Sarang in his final days fell victim to what I can only describe as a mix of depression turned into religious fervor. In the wake of the comet crash, the remaining vestiges of humanity remain trapped at the bottom of the sea, so it is easy to imagine that depression, outrage, as well as perhaps ensuing madness were commonplace. Sarang was no exception. When being introduced to the ARC project, Catherine's endeavored to create a simulation that shall serve as a memento, a record, a keepsake that preserves the memory of humankind, Sarang was seemingly dazzled by the idea and began to immediately muse about the meaning of life, or more specifically, what it means to be human when prompted about his thoughts on the project.
What are your thoughts on the ARC project?
The idea is just incredible. By every definition. It really makes you think about what it means to be human.
What makes you say that?
Beyond the basics. Beyond the superficial. I'm convinced there's something with even greater value. You have provided a platform, which is not necessarily restricted to our digital progeny, but a means of actual survival. It's my sincerest belief that we can go on living through the reality of continuity.
While little is known about Sarang's earlier days at Paphos 2, my assumption would be that he was stricken with grief when faced with the cataclysmic event, and perhaps, as I suppose many other staff members must have too, at this point asked himself the question, where to go from here? What is the meaning of a continued existence? The Ark in all its fanciful wrapping might be a nice idea, though it provides no realistic means of actual survival. But to the desperate people at Paphos 2, the Ark quickly became an object of hope, perhaps even faith, inspiring the dreadful idea of continuity.
Our conscious mind is not the pattern of our brain, but a continuous, emergent entity based on that pattern. When Dr. Chun populates the Ark, she is capturing a moment of our existence and placing it inside the digital world. Soon you and your digital you will grow apart due to diverging experiences, but for a tiny window, you are the very same. With unbroken continuity, it will live on. A fulfilling life, no doubt, no less real than the one from which it was plucked. Now remember, you are not your body. You are the emergent entity. That entity just happens to occupy 2 places at once for a while. If you took away your body, you would simply be the only one you can be. The you inside the Ark. Let your body die, and continue on in the digital paradise among the stars.
The idea of being somehow able to become a singular emergent entity is an illusion and the ramblings of a man who had gone insane, and is now desperately seeking for a way to convince himself that there's a means to continue his own life. Dear friends, when you have read this, I will have entered the Ark. As I have explained, this is accomplished by ceasing to live as your scan is being completed. To not frighten Catherine, I will do this in secret, by folding cyanide salts into chewing gum and placing it in my mouth before seeing her. When I hear her announce completion, I will bite down, quickly causing my own demise. When you discover the truth behind my death, know there is no tragedy to mourn, for I am victorious. I advise you all to do the same, and join me inside the Ark. Sincerely, Mark Sarang. One might assume that it may be different, that the idea of continuity is more an attempt to cling to false hope, a means to cope with the hopelessness of the situation the crew finds itself in, but the fact that Sarang has left behind specific instructions, practically an invitation after taking his own life, an action which he seemingly came well prepared to do, encouraging the repetition of his actions while following his example, has led me to the firm belief that Sarang in his final days has abandoned reason and had instead turned to blind hope and belief, into something that he was either no longer willing or simply unable to understand. Although seeing he was a man in a crucial leading position, I find the latter to be rather unlikely. In the wake of Mark Sarang's passing, several other crew members have followed his example, placed their faith into the continuity, and eventually took their own lives after having their brain scans completed against Catherine's consent, ultimately leading to a conflict between Dr. Chun and the security operative John Strohmeyer, resulting in the shutting down of the Ark project as a whole. But why is the idea of continuity an illusion, and why is the idea itself so dangerous? In truth, the idea of continuity can be seen as the first variation of the Cointoss analogy, although applied in a different manner and under different circumstances. While Simon ultimately came to the same disastrous conclusion as the people of Theta, Simon did not have the ever-pressing matter of death constantly knocking on his door as a meddling factor, for Simon is dead, synthetically animated by a force he does not understand, yet he is blessed with time, and also has a conversationalist who possesses the necessary insight to dispel his doubt in the form of Catherine. The crew of Theta did not have this luxury. The only way out for them at the time was death, either that or a false alternative in the form of the Ark. The people believed that they could become an emergent entity by simply ending their lives quick enough after the scan had been completed, which is not so similar from Simon's belief of a 50% chance of waking up in the right body. Both contestants ultimately desire the same thing, to continue from where they left off. There is only a focus on the future, on what comes after, but a general disregard for what happens to the self that was once before. And how could there be? In Sarang's and Simon's theory, there is only one you, represented by either the emergent entity and the winner of the Cointoss respectively. It is irrelevant what happens to the original body, as it is no longer required. The contestants at this point disregard their old bodies to such a degree that they no longer even associate themselves with them, viewing them instead as a kind of shell that one simply peels out of and then goes on about their day, which in a way shows how catastrophically brazen both the idea of continuity as well as the Cointoss analogy are. Since times of old, mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body, is seen as the most basic principle for a healthy existence, and even Catherine herself mentions this earlier when inquiring about the nature of Simon's artificial body in the Theta laboratory.
Interesting. You seem to be one with the diving suit you're wearing. Everything's meshed together. Anyway, the Cortex chip is good news. That means we can transfer your mind to the Ark with a pilot seat.
Kat, I'm half a dead person.
Yes, it makes sense. Think about it. All those simplistic minds we've run into, just reviving a dead person doesn't seem to work that well. A robot body seems to make people a bit unreliable. You are the best of both worlds, a sound mind and a sound body.
However, in these newly developed ways of thinking in the world of SOMA, the title that also means body by the way, the importance of the sound body is completely thrown out of the window. Perhaps even more brazen than this is the assumption that through the timely enactment of death onto the original form, some kind of metaphysical guarantee is being granted that ensures an unbroken chain of continuity for the individual, which simply does not make any sense, but bears resemblance to real-life scenarios where groups of people, often in the form of cults, believed to be able to reach some kind of illustrious afterlife through a self-initiated timely demise. What is lacking here by the contestants is an understanding that in this fictional work, through the means of technology, people are theoretically able to exist more than once in the same time period. An understanding that the you, the emergent entity or the winner of the coin toss, if you will, are not the only party involved in the act. The biggest roadblock for both the idea of continuity as well as the coin toss is technology itself. In fact, the process of copying Simon into a new body is only the second plan. Originally, she even theorized about him wearing two suits over each other, making a copy redundant. It is not clear why she has dropped the idea, but the most likely explanation is that the presence of a dead and waiting headless Raleigh Herber in a diver suit simply made it seem like an unnecessary complication to dismantle the new and old suit, so that Simon could stuff himself inside. There is also the chance that it could have been simply physically impossible to wear both suits on top of each other, leaving the copying method as the only valid option. So following the completion of one hell of a shopping list at Omicron, Catherine instructs Simon to assemble a new body with the help of Raleigh Herber's corpse for him to use to traverse the abyss. However, here, Catherine is a little dishonest with her words, and she explicitly uses the words transfer instead of copy when explaining the plan to Simon.
The Cortex chip is good news. That means we can transfer your mind to the Ark with a pilot seat. You know how you were transferred from Vancouver?
Toronto.
From then to now. I want to transfer your mind into a new body.
There must be something wrong. Can't you run a diagnosis or something?
What was that?
No, it's just...
Why was it still talking?
It's the same like before.
Catherine, why was he still talking?
That's how it works, you know that.
What do you mean?
You know it's not magic. You were copied. The sleeping Simon in the seat was copied, and now you are here, just like Simon lived on in Toronto.
God damn you, Kath. Two Simons? There can't be two Simons.
When discussing on whether Catherine is to blame for Simon's distress following the realization of what just happened, her dishonesty in her choice of words earlier are a determining factor that puts her in an almost manipulative light. At the same time, one can argue that Simon is simply being naive and continuously refuses to accept the reality that there is no continued one-man existence for him. It is also in the wake of this event that Simon, for the first time, explicitly talks about the coin toss as a means of explaining more to himself rather than someone else what just occurred with him. I am no psychologist, but observing Simon's reactions inadvertently makes me think that he is undergoing a grieving process in his various stages, in the wake of this reality-shattering event. So let us go over the sequence of events in more detail so that we might understand why Simon even reached the idea of the coin toss in the first place.
What did you think would happen?
That you were gonna take my mind and put it into another body, like a brain transplant.
I'm sorry, it wouldn't work that way.
You realized how messed up this is?
Please, I didn't mean to upset you.
How did you expect me to react to this shit?
Please stop.
You're fucking disgusting. What's gonna happen to him?
He'll sleep for a while, a few days.
And then what? Wake up in this fucking nightmare again? All alone? So cruel.
Well, what do you want me to do with him? Make friends? Let him know that we have to leave him behind when we go into the abyss?
What if he didn't need to wake up?
You'd do that?
I don't know. Maybe.
There. I set it up for you. Hit the switch if you want to drain his battery. He'll die within a minute. I'd rather not stay plugged in any longer.
Here, following the initial shock over the realization that the procedure does not function the way he envisions, Simon breaks out into rage. It is here where Catherine proves her own social incompetence, and instead of making an attempt at reconciliation, she retreats into her own shell, providing the unstable Simon with a choice to either leave his former self to the fates or end his life proactively. Objectively speaking, this is a ruinous decision that could have marked the end of the pair's cooperation had Simon truly chosen not to forgive her, which could have been likely and could have spelled the end of their joint venture. Furthermore, in self-defense, Catherine now lays out the principles of the copying in detail, something she had not admitted up until that point. It is the viewer's guess on whether she was being manipulative or simply had no empathy or concern over what Simon would think of this decision. It is worth noting that other characters have mentioned Catherine in passing as being an unpleasant individual who is not easy to like. While it is never explicitly mentioned what specific attribute about her makes her unpleasant, my guess is that her occasional tendency for hyperfixation and lack of another person's emotional state, coupled with her seeming inability to navigate through conflicts, can make her appear as an approachable and off-putting person. Following his initial outrage, Simon has a moment of silence to calm down before falling into sadness, where he begins to ponder over questions such as whether there is a heaven for redundant copies, or whether there would be someone up there to call him an imposter. It is here in this scene where he eventually reaches his personal conclusion that he had flipped a coin and called the right side, while also being forced to acknowledge the presence of the other participant in this metaphorical game of chance that he made up. In his view, he and the original Simon sat on a table and played a game that determined their fate. He partially accepts that he is no longer who he had believed himself to be, and that there is no turning back.
It's dumb luck, right? And I woke up in the right body. He's a redundant copy. I'll never experience my journey, the full journey. He wouldn't understand. How could he? I couldn't do it, and you knew it. You were right in trying to hide it from me. Only wish you'd done a better job. I basically flipped a coin, and if I had called the wrong side, I'd be rotting away at Omicron. I mean, there's nowhere to know, right? You didn't hit the make sure Simon wakes up in the right body switch, did you? Not that you would know. I mean, he would still claim to be the right Simon. Christ. This is awful. We did an awful fucking thing. And you wouldn't mind? Why would you? How could you know that it's not me, the me that I am, the same that I've always been? Let me say something. I don't want to think.
Thankfully for him, in that moment, however, Catherine manages to come back out of her shell and seems to at long last be on the same emotional train track as Simon himself, concluding that
I'm not religious, but I can see why people would be. The privilege of being makes a strong case, at least every once in a while.
Do you still feel that sense of awe? Even like this?
Things are different, but we're still here.
What's the point of going on? Everyone's gone. All the people still left are digital copies trapped in computers at the bottom of the sea. We'll never be able to rebuild or reclaim what we were.
Are you really so unhappy being what you are, or is this about the man who went for a scan 100 years ago?
Both, I guess.
opening new perspectives for Simon and helping him overcome his emotional crisis, at least for now. Having understood as to why both Simon and the people of Theta may have reached the conclusions that they did, the only thing left to do now is to see whether these theories hold any merit. Spoiler alert, they do not. Copying, in most systems, works by reading the original data from the original location and then assembling a copy of said data based on the information that it was read from. If we are the original consciousness and engage in a coin toss as to who gets to move on, we are always destined to lose, as we never move on from the original location. It is always our duplicate, our copy, that will outlast us. If I have understood this correctly, then you could argue that assuming the copy is created from the read information that is stored in an in-between storage, the consciousness does not exist just twice, but even thrice for a moment during the process of copying. Even if we replace copying with moving data from one storage to another, the process is still mostly the same. The only difference being that when it is moved, the original that is being deleted as soon as the new copy is completed. The only time when the original is moved to a new location is when the physical storage the data is stored on is being removed from the old device and inserted into the new one, as it is being done with Catherine when a Cortex chip is being taken from the broken down Mockingbird to be inserted into Simon's Omnitool early on in the story at Lambda.
Custom Cortex chip found. Shutting down helper chain. Have a nice day.
Just pretty much anything will fit. Oh, this feels weird.
Following the patterns of SOMA's storytelling, this seems to be a rule that applies to technology in this world as well. Therefore, the Cointoss analogy loses its meaning. The same goes for the idea of continuity. One might argue that while the duplicate experiences this continuity in full, there is still no emergent entity to be found, for even the temporary duplicate that is made by extracting the information from the original will eventually be deleted when it is no longer needed, removing the so-called emergent entity. If a scan is initiated and immediately launched, then two versions of the same mind merely, although merely is a strange word in this context, exist on two different mediums at the same time. Furthermore, should the new duplicate be apprised of the presence of the original, which now goes through a different experience than itself, I doubt that the illusion of unbroken continuity can be maintained without an act of active disassociation from the aforementioned original, which in turn marks the moment when the other you, that used to be yourself moments prior, loses their familiarity and becomes a stranger.
Catherine!
I'm here.
What the hell happened? What went wrong?
Nothing. They're out there, among the stars. We're here.
No. We were getting on the Ark. I saw it. It finished loading just before it launched.
Yeah, I saw.
Then why are we still here?
Simon, I can't keep telling you how it works. You won't listen. You know why we're here. You were copied onto the Ark. You just didn't carry over. You lost the coin toss. We both did. Just like Simon at Omicron, just like the man who died in Toronto 100 years ago.
No. This is bullshit. We came all this way. We launched the Ark.
I know it sucks, but our copies are up there. Catherine and Simon are both safe on the Ark. Be happy for them.
Are you crazy? We're gonna die down here with those fuckers living at large on a spaceship. They're not us. They're not us.
I'm sorry you feel that way, Simon. I'm proud of what we did. We made sure that something of the hundreds of thousands of years of human history survived, that something lives on.
No. Fuck this. Fuck this. Fuck you. Fuck you, Catherine. You lied. And I believed in you. I trusted you. You said we're getting on the fucking Ark.
We are on the Ark, you idiot! I didn't lie. I can't be responsible for your goddamn ignorance. You
Fuck! Catherine? Please don't leave me alone. Catherine? Catherine?